Okay, the new Percy Jackson show is out. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it, and it's time we had a fandom discussion about it. Ever since I checked this book out of my middle school library, I've been obsessed. It was the first book I wrote a fanfiction about, the first book that I participated in online fandom with. I just wanted to go to this world, this camp, do these activities. Look at these kids. They fight monsters and go to the underworld and just get to go on adventures completely unsupervised. It's every tween's dream. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Nathan. I'm an illustrator, and in this video, I'm just gonna talk about the series, what I liked about it, what I didn't like, the changes that were made from the books, all while we get to watch a time-lapse of some fan art I did celebrating my love for this beloved character. As always, spoilers ahead, you've been warned, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the speed draw. Alright, when I think about the reasons why I love Percy Jackson, a huge part of that is Camp Half-Blood and the world that Rick Riordan created in his books. I really loved this series, obviously, and I was a bit territorial. I would have beef with the Harry Potter kids being like, Percy Jackson is better, because who wants to go to a boarding school to learn things from magical creatures when you can go to a summer camp? Also, like, I was American, so I related to him more, and Percy was more of a screw-up and had all these learning disability, and was just so much more flawed than Harry Potter. I was convinced that it was better. And now that I'm older, that's really childish. We should not fight with other fandoms. We can all coexist together in harmony. But given that J.K. Rowling is now a TERF, I feel a little validated in my middle school stance. So I wanted to say it here. Foresight's 2020 and Rick Riordan is an ally, so love that. But I really do love this world, and I wanted to depict all of my faves just up in a tree, climbing. I think that's the spirit of summer. You know, I've only been to a summer camp a couple of times because it's so expensive, but in the summers when you can't afford to, which is pretty much all of them except for two, we would like climb trees, and the feeling of climbing a huge tree with your friends and looking down and just feeling on top of the world, I wanted to capture that in this image. And speaking of world building, let's talk about it. So one change that I absolutely love is when we introduce the mist concept in the series. Like, look at this woman. She just changes in front of everybody. So we already understand that in this world, Percy has something wrong with him. He can see things other kids can't see. And this fixes a huge problem that was in the books. Like in the books, this interaction happened in secret when it didn't need to. Having it play out in front of everybody just really simplifies and shows how this world works. And it also addresses a huge problem with how the books haven't quite aged as well. I was just complimenting Rick Riordan on his great work of representing LGBTQ people, especially trans and queer people, in his later sequel series. But in his early works, every single person with a visible disability was secretly a magical creature in disguise, and this trope just made it feel like there were no real-life disabled people, and it robbed a lot of disabled representation. And that doesn't feel good when you're a real viewer in our world with a Disney Plus subscription watching Percy Jackson. And if this show kept that, it would have felt really bad, like, oh, there's no room for me to be an adventurer here. Whereas this show gets rid of that unnecessary plot line, specifically with Grover, and it focuses on Percy being a disabled person. In the original books, there was excellent representation for people who have dyslexia and invisible disabilities, and sort of portraying what it was like to have ADHD and not being fit with the world around you and the structures and how you're expected to learn and sit still. That was all really excellent, and it very much took the place of a metaphor. Like, we all know that we're not literally children of gods, but this is what it feels like. And so by focusing on the disabled representation that was done very well in the original books, we get this beautiful parable of Percy almost like having schizophrenia, like what is real and what's not real, and coming to terms with like his disability and his misrepresentation or misreading of the world is valid. Like, he's not flawed. Just because he perceives the world in a different way doesn't mean that it's not valid. And that was just so lovely. I think diving into that was so great. And we really saw him being a troubled kid and really getting to be with Sally Jackson, his mother, and seeing how she had all this difficulty with a son who has these learning disabilities, has all of these different gifts that aren't being appreciated for what they are, and how the school system doesn't reward his way of thinking, his creativity, and how he was sort of punished for it. I thought all of that was done so well. And yeah, I'm a big fan of all of those changes. I loved giving her more screen time and really getting to delve into her psychology, which brings me to talking about the characters and how they were portrayed in the show. I found the characterization to be the most interesting thing that the show did, because like this clip of Percy flossing, like I was, oh, that's Percy. They get it. His head is empty. He's just a silly little guy. And seeing that they understood that made me really excited for other characters like Nico, the resident gay. We have spoilers here. I'm really excited for his storyline with Will Solstice and to like see how they interact with each other and what changes they make to like maybe give them more screen time. I don't know. I'm just looking forward to it. In this image, obviously I'm going with these young versions of Percy, Annabeth, and Grover, so I had to make an even younger Nico. He's just so little here. I forget the exact age difference, but he can't be older than 8 or 9, something like that, like full-blown a kid. And so it was really cute drawing a wholesome image of Will like leaning up against the tree trunk and just having a little innocent interaction. My favorite character as a kid, though, wasn't Nico, but was actually Annabeth, and I really was fascinated with Leah's portrayal of her, because also in the way that she was written, when they go to the water park, her being like, I've never seen a movie before, it's like, oh, Annabeth is the smart girl, but she's also been here her entire life. Like, she doesn't have these fundamental aspects of what movies and the outside world is like, or pop culture. So she would be very awkward and almost stifled in a lot of ways. And I was like, that makes perfect sense. And it was brilliant. I felt like adding that dimension to her character was just such a very smart insight into who Annabeth is. Same thing with like Clarice. I always imagined her as being like really stupid as a kid, but watching the actress playing as her, the daughter of Ares, it was like, oh, she's almost like flirtatious. Like when she calls Percy a dummy, it's like she does it with a smile. And it's like, this isn't a doofus or a dumb girl. This is a very popular jock, which is so obvious when you watch it, that it wasn't something that was exactly matching what was in my head. And yes, the show did make a lot of other changes. One, people are complaining a lot on TikTok about how much the characters know. And in the defense of the show, they only have a limited amount of episodes, but it never made sense that Annabeth, a girl who grew up reading all of Greek mythology, would wander into Medusa's lair, see the statues, and just have no idea that it was Medusa. Like, it was obvious even to me as a middle schooler that it was Medusa. So you betcha that Annabeth would have known immediately which myths she's encountering. There is a little justification for this. In the novel, there was so much time of them traveling through the woods, and they started feeling the beginning of starvation, so they were a little delirious. They weren't thinking clearly, and they were super hungry. And also, they were very dyslexic. So there was a little bit of suspension of disbelief. Like, we could believe that in the book, Annabeth would accidentally make a mistake and not know this was Medusa, but you don't have time to show the beginning effects of starvation in a TV episode, and it just made sense making them smarter. The only time that I can kind of understand this doesn't work as well was with the ending, where Percy was just straight up like, it's Kronos, and he put all of the dots together, but I don't even mind that. I'm like, why can't these kids be capable? Let them be smart. I didn't mind it. I felt like that was a problem with the original novels. Like, you always were so frustrated that they didn't know their mythology, which is like, you know these things are real. You better be reading a book and understanding who can kill you and what their motifs are. Well, I got very carried away with that. I completely missed telling you that Will's book that he's carrying, I like to imagine, is a Star Wars manga, because, the only thing we really know about that kid is that he's a nerd, and he's not an archer, he's a healer, son of Apollo, but he likes Star Wars, so I included that character detail, and I'm currently drawing Rachel, which was such a controversial character in fandom. Y'all, I was there. I was on the front lines of the internet when these books were being freaking released, and there was so much discourse around Rachel. Like, people hated her or loved her. It's funny because I was so territorial about fandom, but when it came to shipping, I was a multi-shipper. I was like, yeah, I ship Percy with Annabeth in like one universe, and Percy with Rachel in another, and also Percy with Nico in a third. Like, I was completely fine with that. But for some reason, that really did not jive with some people's brain chemistry. They were like, no, there's only one person for everyone. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know, they're cute, what? Rachel is of course an artist, so it was fun making her clothes super messy like how they are in the book, stained with paint. I even put some on her legs and her hair. You can see I'm addressing the background finally. I do this beautiful tree, and this is where I pop off a little too hard. I don't know what possessed me, but I made this tree so detailed that I realized I had to step my little self up and make this background beautiful and very well rendered, because y'all, I just go so hard on this tree. If the rest of the background was just blotches of color, it was not gonna turn out. You can see I'm blotching them in frantically as I realize, oh no, I care about this fandom so much, and I finally have the technical skills to do great fan art. I can't let them down, and I've already set the bar so high with this tree, and it's not even done yet. So I really just start putting in leaves and foliage and trying to get that atmospheric perspective correct. These foreground characters are what bring us to our lovely members on Patreon. If you would like to support the channel so I can keep making videos like this, the link is in the description down below, and you get to make requests for your favorite characters to appear in the background of my videos. We already covered Nico, Will, and Rachel earlier in the video, so now it's time to shift our attention to the next characters that were suggested by the Patreon, Achilles and Patroclus. If you are in the Percy Jackson fandom or on TikTok, you're probably familiar with The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book retells the story of the Iliad from the perspective of a very minor character, which is Patroclus, who is the childhood best friend and lover of Achilles, who is the greatest hero of the Greeks. Said to be stronger than Heracles himself, he fights for the Greeks in the middle of the Trojan War. This is a war that is fought for many reasons, but the most famous reason is the kidnapping of Helen of Sparta, better known as Helen of Troy. The other character you see who is giving side eye to our beloved duo is Hector, who fights for the Trojans. And yeah, my reason for them all being in this image is that they've all dunked themselves in the river of Lethe and have been mind-wiped and reincarnated, and yet even in another life, Achilles and Patroclus have found each other and are in love, because of course they are. And now they just have camp beef with Hector, who in, you know, a past life shot a bow and arrow and killed Achilles. Spoilers, it's a 3,000-year-old story. You should have seen it coming. But check out the book, it really is that good. I'm so happy that they were suggested for me to draw. I love what Madeline Miller's book has done in the zeitgeist. My favorite part of the Hades video game was the subplot that you can do to bring Achilles and Patroclus together, because they've been pulled apart by death and by this complicated history, but their love can find a way through Zagreus. Whenever these two appear in a piece of Greek mythology retelling, I am here for it. I love that they've given us the word Achillean, which is the male-male love equivalent of the word sapphic. It's just the collective subconscious has really embraced this interpretation of this famous historical duo, and I could not be happier for it. Y'all, I should talk about Greek myths more. This is so much fun. I am having a grand old time. The next mythological figure we're going to discuss is none other than Pandora. You've probably heard Pandora's box, but did you know in the original Greek, it's actually Pandora's jar or Pandora's Pythos. Because of this, I have cast this figure as the camp director. You probably know, if you've read the books, that Chiron isn't always the director of Camp Half-Blood. Daedalus has filled in the role, and so is Tantalus. So for this particular summer, Pandora is fitting the bill, and I've given her a giant, oversized Stanley Cup that is the mythological jar. I just feel like that's that sort of campy detail, the equivalent of how Dionysus wears aloha shirts with tigers on them. It's that camp that makes this world really sing, in my opinion. And she's wearing like a yoga outfit and sunglasses. Like, we all know the Stanley Cup woman, and it's Pandora, and it's great and beautiful. And I love that she's like telling these half-bloods what to do, and she's in charge. I feel like she would be so funny in the books. I recommend the nonfiction book by Natalie Haynes, Pandora's Jar, which gave me such insight onto the character. Pandora was never a villain, and she's been painted with this coat of Judeo-Christian Eve by all of these male retellers who have really given her the short end of the stick. Definitely check out Pandora's Jar, which covers a myriad of female characters who are misrepresented from their original mythology, one of which is Medusa, who, in the original myths, never kills anybody. This woman never kills anybody. Just let that sink in. Like, she's portrayed as a monster in almost every media, and there's no record that she's hurt a single person a day in her life. And because of that, we are now going to transition into speaking of Medusa as depicted in the books versus Medusa depicted in the Percy Jackson series. In the books, they go with a very sanitized version of her, where she's this priestess of Athena who consensually sleeps with Poseidon in the temple and is disgraced. Whereas, I think it's so brave that in the show, they leaned into her not being a monster. Like, Sally literally says, "What makes you think she's a monster?" Which was so beautiful. Like, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. Because the show was already updating the source material, I got so emotional in the episode with Medusa because I really thought for a moment, maybe they're gonna redeem her and depict her right, and she's gonna become this great ally for Percy. You can really see a world where she isn't beheaded, and I think that would have been the greatest update to the source material, but ultimately they do sort of a hat trick where she becomes villainous towards the end of the interaction, and they have to behead her, and the plot continues unchanged. But if she would have been an ally, I think that would have been a stronger message, but it also would have had this ripple effect that you could only depict Sally and Poseidon's relationship as abusive. You know, I think that they really could have leaned into him being an absentee father rather than this like tragic, he wants to be involved, but he just can't because of his job and his circumstances, being a god, which I think is kind of BS. And I think if they would have portrayed Sally being in an abusive relationship, not with Gabe, but with this person who left her, who is Poseidon, I think that would have been much stronger, and then you could have really gone there with how he sexually assaulted Medusa. It would have just been a great through line. So I hope that there is some resolution to that, but I don't think we're going to get that in this particular version of the story. But we can retell these myths any old way we want, so hopefully we'll get a retelling like that one day. Yeah, and then the last figures you see in the background, someone wanted Cerberus, of course, and I have him, like, fighting or chasing Xena, is that her name? And Gabrielle from Xena, the warrior princess, right? I know that she's an Amazon and that's a Greek mythology world. I've only seen a couple of episodes, but yeah, I know that she does that spinny jump twirly thing, and she does that yell, so I have her in the middle of that, and I know that they're lesbians, so, you know, it's just a normal weekend for them on a date running through the woods. Yeah, there's no canonical explanation for why they're there. It's just for fun, and it's very Greek. So, there you go. You can see that I'm working on this background to get it up to par with the rest of everything that's going on. Yeah, it's a lot of pushing and pulling and adding lots and lots of layers to get the grass and the atmosphere just right. I really am proud of this background. It made me feel like a very talented artist. I think I did a good job sort of portraying this almost shady, is it nighttime side of camp where you fight monsters and it's dangerous and mysterious, and then also this, is it daytime or is it just sunnier and there are less trees in front of the lake? Yeah, I feel like these two different sides of camp are very well depicted in the image, and I think the water looks good. I'm just really proud of all of it. Going back to the show, I think other standout characters that I want to just give a spotlight or talk about is particularly Luke. I was like, that actor, I've been a kid, a little boy at a camp, and that is the exact scrawny guy that as a younger camper you look at as just the coolest guy. Like, even though there's not a real reason, just as a little kid, you're like, that's the coolest guy at camp. And adults are like, that's just some guy, what? Yeah, that make sense to anybody else? It makes sense to me. I had a lot of fun adjusting this tree. Whenever you don't know what's happening on screen in the time lapse of this illustration, if you look really hard, I'm probably adding a leaf somewhere, or I'm drawing bark on the backgrounds of a tree. It's sort of like a Where's Waldo of what is Nathan actually drawing on the canvas sometimes, which is a fun game to play. I add these lines of shadows, and you know, the camp is enchanted so they can control their weather, which is really cool and fun. There were lots of great Patreon suggestions that I didn't quite get to, particularly this suggestion where, you know, of course, if someone wants to see me draw all the Greek gods, so if you're interested in that being a separate video where I literally just redesign all of the Greek gods and the pantheon, is that something y'all would be interested in? Because you know me, I'm an illustrator. That's what I do. And I'd be willing to do it, but just let me know in the comments down below, and also like the video, and if it does well, then I'll do it. But I'll now talk about, I think, the last figure who was suggested on Patreon that I do include, which is the story of Pygmalion and Galatea. If you know the story of Pygmalion, I'm not talking about My Fair Lady, but rather the Greek myth where this artist sculpts a beautiful woman sculpture out of marble, and then Venus or Aphrodite brings her to life. Yeah, I've read Madeline Miller's telling of the story, and also after hearing interviews of her talk about the original story in Ovid, it's, you know, yeah, no spoilers quite for this one, but yeah, I draw her in the corner, seemingly holding someone's head under the water. You know, do with that as you will. That's sort of my homage to this, like, I think it's a Danish oil painting called The Fall of Icarus. Let me know in the comments down below where this painting actually is from, because I don't quite remember. But, you know, it's very much a scene in the life of the countryside, and Icarus falling to his death is just sort of off in the corner, not the point at all of the painting almost. And so, yeah, I'm gonna title this piece, you know, The Fall of Pygmalion, even though it's just happening over there in the corner. What's happening? You know. But this is the finished illustration. If you made it this far in the video, congratulations. You're cooler than everyone else who watched this video and clicked off. Tell me all your thoughts and feelings about the Percy Jackson show, the books, the fandom, really anything you want in the comments down below. If you want to support my videos and what I do, please like and subscribe. And if you want to go to my Patreon link down in the description, you can make recommendations for characters to appear in the background of my videos, as well as other perks. And I think for just $4 a month, you can have your name in the end credits. And speaking of end credits, here they are now. Special thanks to Anna Sophia Boyd, Axelius the Great, Bodhi, Blue Uwu, Kay Clark, Christopher, Dabadudu, Dax Quinn, Aaron Martin, Emoe, Gay Jarris, Jay Johar, JD Boy 2000, Johan, Kitsune Chibiko, Lucky Paradox, Melon, Mild Mothman, Mistake, Native Runner, Orion Amastasia, Pinecone, Potion Cellar Door, Rin, Scorching Ray, Sir Camelot, Smalls the Sax Jammer, Shenanigans, Tad the Turtle, Tarthalinor, The Real Michael, Thumper Daytime, Thony, Tortilla Chips, Tuesdays Anyways, Tundra Katie Bean, and Tuppence Pies. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Nathan, and I'll upload a new video real soon. Bye!